Okay, I wanted to make a update on the Suzuki 1983 RM500. I got this thing disassembled, and it was thoroughly thrashed. I made a determination by uh, uh, splitting the cases and observing the transmission and the crankshaft, and also the suspension front and back as to whether I should proceed on with this. And I found it to be worth it, so I went for it. First thing I did was to go ahead and strip that frame after I had everything disassembled. Strip the frame of all the beat up, old, baked on black paint, and stripped it down to bare metal, and then resprayed it with a good automotive enamel. It came out halfway decent. Um, it had the frame had a piece of angle iron as a brace for a crack that was on it, which was common on these frames on the RM500. And I made a determination to go ahead and leave it there. I could have went off and cut it off and put a better brace on there or replace the frame, but I decided that that's going to be a good base to go ahead and install the remote reservoir instead of where it originally would be located up by underneath the gas tank on the side. I'm going to put it down over here. So it came out all right. I'm still happy with that. The next thing I did was reassemble the lower end. The transmission was mint. There was no wear on that thing. I couldn't believe it. The crankshaft itself, it was well within specs, so I took a high-powered jeweler's eye loop that I had and looked in on the cage and bearings, and the needles were practically brand new, no scoring whatsoever on it, and also the cage had no deterioration on it, on the edges. So I was real happy with that. I didn't have to replace a rod, which I normally do on all my rebuilds. I normally just put a fresh rod in it. But I did have to replace all the bearings throughout the motor. All the bearings, transmission, crank, all new seals, thrust washers on the output shaft of the transmission I replaced. Also I replaced the clutch hub carrier bearings also on top of the transmission bearings. So freshened that up, and then I'll talk about the cylinder in just a little bit. But then I did the forks, and they were real good on the inside, and no nicks on the outside, plus they were straight tubes. So I went ahead and put fresh bushings and seals in those. OEMs too. Let's see, what else? Stock paint still on the forks. I cleaned it up real good, and it actually came out pretty good because they are real ugly looking when I initially started it. But they cleaned up real well, so I'm leaving it. Then I started on the frame as far as fresh bearings in the front and in the rear. In the rear was Suzuki used a lot of spherical bearings throughout the suspension components, and one of the things they did was up here, these sphericals that used on the top strut linkage, I replaced those with sealed ball bearings, and that came out real good. Put fresh cage needle bearings in the shaft, the pivot shaft for the cushion arm, and then also fresh bushings down at the bottom that attach to the swing arm. Swing arm bearings were replaced also, and then also I'll do all the wheel bearings too when the time comes on that. The seat base itself was in very good shape, and the foam that was used, it was accessory foam seat at the time by the company called Seat, C-E-E-T. The foam is in real good shape, still soft and yet still firm, so it hasn't deteriorated that bad. But the cover, the seat cover, was very faded and was torn in different areas just from wear. So I'm going to replace that. There's a company that's reproducing them, so I'm replacing that. The gas tank I sanded, and I'm only halfway through in the sanding process, so I'm hoping to bring that back into a nice shiny condition. The airbox itself was totally wasted, so I procured one from eBay and disassembled it, resealed the seams with some sealant, and then that's ready to rock. What I started to do also at the same time while I'm starting to put this back together is I want to start lightening up it a little bit. And so I started using aluminum screws, like those right there, aluminum bolts, for different areas that are non-stress related. And then I'll use titanium for some of the more stress related areas. But I used the aluminums there. I used the aluminums right here for those. And then I'll also, obviously the nuts for all the linkages. I don't think I'll go as far as putting titanium bolts through the linkage, but more in the top half of the bike I'll use as much lightening that I can, such as on the triple clamps. The triple clamps weigh a ton on this thing, and part of the reason is because of like these 10 millimeters that the Suzuki had up here, and also, although I have some modern Honda bolts in here for the triple clamps right now, I'll probably replace these here, and also on the lower triple clamps with titanium ones, so that it'll help lighten it up. And there's also a lot of other bracketry, tank mount bolts, that stuff that I'll replace with lightning bolts or lighter bolts, so that I can take some weight off of this thing. And without major expense, you know what I mean? I mean, it's not like I'm replacing axles or pivot shafts with titanium, but just to lighten it up a little. I mean, the cylinder itself weighs you wouldn't believe how heavy that frickin' thing is. Not just the cylinder, I should say the head. The head is unbelievably heavy. I may even go ahead and lighten up the head by doing some work on that, but I don't know. Either way. All the holes, externally this thing was really thrashed. It really looked ugly. And one of the things that you could tell also that it was abused and not taken care of was that all the bolt holes were all, someone stuffed American bolts in there through the years. So they rode this thing a lot. This thing was initially a race bike, I believe, because the internals of the motor and of the suspension was so well taken care of, but yet externally the things that deteriorated easily did. The bolt holes, all the things related externally, all the mounting structures, they were wasted. They had to be all cleaned up. But I did that, and matter of fact, I'm going to be putting some helicoil inserts, 6mm ones, for like tank mount over here, the tank mount, some other mounts up here. I sealed them, and I'll be putting reinsert helicoils in there, so that I'll have a good solid 6mm insert to put screws in. The next thing I started on was the wheels. The aluminum wheels, as ugly as they were initially, they came out wonderful. You just got to put the time in and the elbow grease. But as you can see here, both rims came out real good. They were straight. The spokes were straight. All the nipples were in very good shape, but the spokes were extremely tarnished. So instead of getting Buchanan spoke kits, which I normally do on rebuilds, I went ahead and asked a local company here that does plating if they would work with motorcycle spokes, which they never had before, and they said sure. And so for half the price of what I was getting Buchanan spokes spoke kits for, I'm getting these things plated now. They're at the platers right now. The cylinder, I wanted to tell you about the cylinder. The cylinder wore great, and it was ported, and the head was modified by HPT Sports. It was a race shop down in Tennessee, and the gentleman, unfortunately, I tried to contact him, and he had just passed away a little while back, but he was a very good tuner, I come to find out, and he's the one that ported this cylinder and modified the head. So I believe that when I get this thing together with a fresh bore on it and a fresh piston, that I hope things are going to romp. I hope it's going to work really well. The rear shock was really beat up, and so what I did was, after sandblasting the heck out of that shock, I went ahead, or I mean the spring, I repainted it with an enamel. And then also the shock body was really torn up, so I spent a little time on that, and then I sprayed it with a copper color. Almost looked like the Nolene's, or I mean the Olene's color, but it's not. It's, you know, it's copper. But internally, I rebuilt it with fresh bushings and seals, and a new bumper, obviously. And Dave Dixon from Suzuki RM500.com. Here I printed out all of his instructions for helping me rebuild that shock instead of me doing it, since I never did that particular shock before. You know, but I've done others. You know, there's a Olene's for a CR, for older CRs that. But anyway, getting back. After that, I started on the hubs. The front hub. This was one of my determining factors, too, was when I opened up this front hub, it was like, look at this thing. I haven't touched it, other than just removing the bearings to put fresh bearings in it, but this thing was like never used. They put this thing together to resell after they were done racing it, I believe. This is my forensic guess on this. And then it was thoroughly thrashed in a non-race environment. And they never used the front brake. That's my guess. But the rear hub, which takes a whole lot of abuse with an open class bike, the bearings were completely gone, and it was really floating around. It was floating around so bad that part of this liner here is broke off, the brake liner. So I am going to commit to finding someone to replace that, sweat that thing out, or cut that thing out and sweat a new one in, and get the right tolerance in that. But the look how good the paint cleaned up. This is, you can imagine how ugly this thing looked, but with elbow grease and just time, just kept on scrubbing. Look at that. That's not painted. That's the original enamel from back in 1983 when they built this thing, and when Suzuki built it. The carb and throttle assembly is finished, ready to rock. I put a newer throttle on it. It's from the mid-90s RMs, but I use that throttle and cable. And no, the cable is stock. I use a stock RM500 cable, which I procured from eBay, but the throttle assembly is from a 96 RM 250. And the carburetor itself, inside, it needed degreasing and degumming, so I had to take my time on that. I put all new jets in it and new needle, but the slide was looking good. It didn't look heavily worn, so I'm hoping that it'll be good. And I also put a fresh needle and seat in it. Let's see what else. The silencer. Oh, the pipe. He did not. The gentleman I bought this from did not give the pipe to me. He had sold that to try to recoup some of his money, I believe, when he figured out he wasn't going to go any further with this thing, because he started, like I said, he started disassembling the bike. But he gave me the silencer for it, and this thing was in great shape. I took out all the packing just the other day, and it was still stuffed nice and tight, but it was thoroughly soaked. You know, the 3/4 of it was soaked with the premix. So I mean, it was old, and you know, although it would sound dead in a little bit, it's still going to be better with fresh packing. And I started go ahead and refinish this a little bit, and it's getting there, but it still needs a lot of work, you know. This I don't know how many times I tried to straighten the brake arm up, because it was just so thoroughly twisted and whopper-jawed, but I think I've got it in the right position now. I had to go ahead and re-drill out the holes for the pedal on the brake, because it was all wallowed out, and I used a stainless steel drift pin on that, and I've got to finish it up, but it's all nice and tight now. and it springs back because the spring was good on it. It was just that it was all real super sloppy. But now it's nice and tight, like it's supposed to be. And I'll go ahead and grind that lower tit off so it's not extended out that much. But that's how it should. That's how it should look. I'll also sand it down and paint it. I'm not going to powder coat anything because this is a race. I'm going to actually race this thing, or one of my boys will race it. So it's you know, it's going to be utilized for what it was for. And here's all this, you know, like here, perfect example, sphericals all the way through this suspension. It was, I think it was a very inexpensive and cost-efficient way of putting a bearing surface for linkages, but they're all cracked. These are all wasted. They're loose. The casing is cracked on them. So those were for the shock mounts. I've got to replace those. These were for the, and I don't know if you can hear that, but they were wasted. That's for the shock linkage in the back that I replaced with sealed ball bearings. So I'm getting there. You know, there's the insert. That's what they use. That's a stock spacer insert from the factory for the Suzuki front hub. And here's a HRC magnesium CR hub that Honda used back in the mid '90s. That's all magnesium that I'm doing for this other bike over here, this factory bike, and it uses the same thing. It looked the same way, and I'm thinking, holy cow, you know, that's pretty cool. The shock reservoir, you know, I really had to do a lot of cleaning on these stacks that are in here for the dampening. They were so caked with dirty oil that it took a long time to get all that thoroughly cleaned out. But it's ready to rock. Same with the dampener for the stack up here on that thing. For the shock, for the ones on the rebound, ones for compression. Oh, and the bladder's good. The bladder is in fine shape. No cracks, no dry rotting. So I'm reusing it. Heck yes. Let's see. Told you about the cylinder, the hubs. I've got work on that rear hub to do. I've got to try to find a shorter. I've got to get these types of fittings. I don't know where I can find these fittings. I'm having a rough time. It's taken me a long time to get these metric fittings, but I will get them, and I will get some steel braided hose to shorten up that brake line, or to shorten up that remote shock reservoir line. Okay. Oh, the cable, the front brake cable was actually in very good shape. It was an OEM cable, and all I had to do was it had a slight crack here, so I decided to put some shrink wrap. So, with the appropriate color, yellow. So I hope that's not going to look too goofy. But that cable's in good shape. I've got to get a clutch cable. I procured a rear brake cable because the other one was rusted and gone. Or actually, yeah, it was gone. It was broken. And the backing plate was semi-wasted. And it's got a small crack near the flange here because, remember I told you that yeah, there's a small crack right there, but it runs lengthwise, and so I may just cut that part out because magnesium, actually, as light as it is not super strong. It is actually a soft metal, so I'm still going to reuse it though. Bushings are not that bad. I had to get a new pivot pin for the arm, but I think it'll be okay. Oh, and talk about the arm. I had to rebend that thing. Where's that at? Oh, I put that away already in a bag. I had to rebend that about 20 times to get the right bend because it was twisted into a pretzel. Oh, here's some more of that eye candy. The aluminum bolts that I'm using. That's not going to do diddly squat, obviously, you know, down there. But it'll look cool. It's for my benefit, really. Okay. I think that's it for now. And Hopefully I'll make progress shortly on it, but you never know.